Hello, everybody. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of July, 2025, 2 days before Independence Day, July the 4th, which celebrates something that most Americans are pretty pleased about. But we are reversing things today. We are talking about an event, a more recent event than Independence Day, that Americans aren't so pleased about. In fact, one of the darkest days in American history, the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November the 22nd, 1963. But we're not doing a history show. We're doing a show about a novel, a new novel by my guest, Terrence McCauley. It's called The Twilight Town, a Dallas 63 novel, and I'm thrilled that Terrence McCauley, who's a best-selling writer, westerns and other suspense novels, is joining us. Terrence, happy July 4th in a couple of days.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on the show.
So would you agree, Terrence, that we could contrast Independence Day, July 4th, 1776, with the assassination of JFK on November the 22nd, 1963, one very bright day, one very dark day?
Yep, I certainly would. Unfortunately, I think the people who are responsible for what happened on November 22nd might not agree with me, but I definitely would say it was one of the darkest days in our country's history.
People responsible. Are you suggesting, Terrence, a degree of conspiracy, a murder most foul?
I would. I've looked into it an awful lot. I've been looking into it for quite a long time, even before I ever thought I was going to write a novel about it, much less a trilogy like this one is. So I've looked into it, and I've seen that there's just too many outstanding questions to think that one person had done it all on their own. And it has nothing to do with a nobody like an Oswald killing a somebody like a president. It's more to do with the secondary characters who were affiliated with Oswald and what they had done with their lives before and after the event. There was one person on the Warren Commission, or one of the investigations, that said the fingerprints of intelligence is all over this guy. And there's just too many coincidences there to ignore, in my opinion.
You note that your book, it's out in a couple of weeks, is a trilogy. You have another book, Chicago 63. Is this the second in a trilogy?
Actually, Chicago 63 was born from my first draft of The Twilight Town. I had written an awful lot of The Twilight Town first before I started pitching it, because I knew it was a complex story and I wanted to get it as tight as I possibly could. In the course of writing that novel, I realized that I had a lot of information on other plots before November 22nd, but I couldn't include them in the book because they just disappear after the date that they were supposed to happen. But I loved the stories. I thought that they were interesting enough to tell. So I included the Chicago plot, which was a more ornate plot than the one in Miami. And I took it from The Twilight Town and I separated it out into its own novella. And that's what Chicago 63 became.
So there's Chicago 63, there's Miami 63, and there's Dallas 63.
That's right. I didn't write Miami 63. It is mentioned in The Twilight Town, but Chicago 63 is, for all intents and purposes, a prequel.
There is, of course, Terrence, you don't need me to tell you this, a library of books about the assassination of Jack Kennedy in Dealey Plaza in Dallas. Mm-hmm. So two questions on this. Why not just, if you're convinced, or you at least believe that there was some sort of conspiracy, why not write a history book? What original contribution do you have? So much has been said on this.
Sure. So much has been said, and so much of it has been said in a lot of different areas and in a lot of different books. Very few of them, except for those that are probably going to be published in the very near future, bring together a lot of the information that's been disclosed over the last 5 to 10 years. A lot of the information that other books have is dated, or it followed one particular train of thought in terms of the assassination. Since I'm a novelist, I wanted to be able to tell that same story with the relevant information in the form of a novel, in the fiction universe, because anything that is nonfiction is held to a much higher standard of original sources, citing information, citing sources, things like that. So I did a lot of research in a lot of different areas, both with documentaries or with nonfiction books and other online primary sources, to understand the scope of what really happened that day. And I wanted to be able to tell it in an entertaining way through the points of view of 3 different police officers in Dallas at that time. A lot of other novels that have taken this on have taken on the idea that it was a very high concept, that it was the CIA or the FBI or people in smoke-filled rooms making these decisions. With me, I approach it as the way I thought it was, and that is a contract hit and a street crime, which is ultimately what happened on the streets of Dallas that morning.
What do you mean a street crime? You mentioned that a lot of people thought it was the CIA. Even Jack Kennedy's brother, Robert Kennedy, who was, of course, the Attorney General at the time, the first call he made to the head of the CIA asking whether it was an inside job. What do you mean by a street crime? That sounds rather haphazard, arbitrary.
Well, for me, it was the reason why RFK asked the CIA if they were behind it was because he recognized the elements of the plot were similar to plots that he had to kill Castro. There's a lot of evidence out there that suggests that as part of RFK and JFK's Operation Mongoose, they were trying a plot just like this within Cuba. So for me, and in my research, I don't think it was the CIA proper that was involved in it. I think it was people that were already criminals that were affiliated with the CIA through the Bay of Pigs invasion, through past gun running to the island of Cuba during the revolution before Castro became a communist. And they were the people who had the means and the opportunity to pull this off. I think they used the people that they had in the camps that they owned here in the United States, in Long Island and in Texas and in Louisiana, to pull this off and to bring about what they wanted. And they wanted to get rid of Kennedy for a variety of reasons. They thought he was soft on communism. They knew he was hard on the mob, and they didn't think he had the spine to go against Cuba. And they wanted their casinos and their heroin and their money trafficking operations back. So when you combine all of those together, I think it was criminal elements in the intelligence agency that pulled this off, which is why I say it was a street crime.
Another of Bobby Kennedy's initial reactions was, I think he said that he thought they would get him first, or that he would go first. All those things you mentioned, of course, it was Bobby Kennedy who was most public in his opposition to the mafia, particularly Jimmy Hoffa. I think Jack Kennedy was more ambivalent. His father, who may have been involved with the mob, was very angry, hostile to Bobby Kennedy's investigation of Hoffa and the mob. Why wouldn't they go after Bobby rather than Jack? Bobby was also much more involved in the plots to kill Castro. He was, of course, much more conspiratorial, had more time to focus on that conspiratorial element, whereas Jack Kennedy was just, I wouldn't say just the president, but he was a little bit more detached from what you call this, the street crime elements, if that is in fact true of what you're arguing.
Right. Well, I mean, if you go after the president and you, as I believe Carlos Giancana said, if you cut off the head of the snake, the body dies. And if they had just gone after RFK, then the power of the presidency could have devoted its entire weight to finding out who had killed his brother. I also believe that LBJ wasn't part of the assassination plot.
Was or wasn't?
Was not. I do
Yeah,
not believe
I
he
don't think
was.
many people believe that, do they? I mean,
yeah, a lot of people have pushed that over the years.
I mean, well-informed people. I mean, there are lots of crazy conspiracy theories.
Right, but the reason why I don't think he was involved isn't because I don't think he was capable of it or that it crossed his mind. I think it was because the people who do stuff like this usually use people they can trust. And a lot of people don't realize that LBJ was under investigation at the time of the assassination as part of the Bobby Baker scandal that was rocking Washington and was even on the front cover of Life magazine a couple of weeks before the assassination. So LBJ was on the verge of being arrested and off the ticket in 1964. So for me, they wouldn't have used him. They would have known, however, that they could lean on him to make the investigation go away and to also make sure that they got the war against communism that some of them were looking for. They thought it might be Cuba. It wound up being Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, if what you're saying is true, there's certainly, if not a smoking gun, certainly a lot of evidence against LBJ. You mentioned Carlos Giancana. So for you, and we don't want to give away all the plot in your new novel, because it is a novel, it's not a history book.
Right.
But for you, essentially, this was a mob job, so to speak.
I think it was a mob intelligence job. But I don't think a lot of people knew about it. There was a gentleman by the name of Joseph Miltier who was caught on an FBI investigation device, a bug they had in somebody's apartment. And he said that the only way something like this could work is if it was a very small operation and not a lot of people knew about it. I think that's exactly what the case was here. And I think Miltier knew a lot about it, and he died soon after the assassination under some mysterious circumstances. So that's what led me to believe that this wasn't necessarily pulled off by the military or the people at the upper echelons of intelligence, but I do think that people who worked with them were involved, and the cover-up afterwards was mostly based on that.
What about J. Edgar Hoover, who, of course, seemed to know everything and everyone, kept voluminous reports on people, on their private lives? How much, in your view, did he know?
I think he knew an awful lot after the fact. And if you listen to some of the tapes that were made when LBJ became president in the days after the assassination, they talked about Oswald being in Mexico, and LBJ, who knew that these conversations were being recorded, said, "We can't put Oswald in Mexico. We can't prove that was him." And they never have been able to. All these years later, the evidence that the CIA and the FBI provided don't show Oswald. They're pictures of somebody else who's been identified as a Russian individual. So for me, I think Hoover understood more than he was letting on. I don't think he knew about it ahead of time. I do think they knew about Oswald ahead of time, and they didn't think he was a threat. And I think that's where the cover-up happened. Where they
do you think if bit of a leading question, I guess, Terrence, but if Hoover had known beforehand, would he have done anything?
I think he would have, because if you look at Hoover's background, he came up through the ranks at a time when the country was being rocked by a growing communist element in the early 1900s, especially before World War I. There were communist attacks on centers of commerce in Boston and in other places. I think there were a couple of them in Manhattan. So for him, the big fear wasn't the mafia. It was always communism infiltrating the United States. And the death of Kennedy really could have spiraled out of control pretty quickly, especially with someone who had what I believe is false communist credentials like Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't think he was an avowed communist. It sounds to me like he was sent to infiltrate those various agencies and organizations to discredit them later on. But I don't think Hoover would have sat back and let that happen, because he wasn't sure what the overall impact would have been to the country.
And one of the oddest things for me, you've mentioned Lee Harvey Oswald, who supposedly was the the sole assassin. He fired the rifle that killed JFK. And then, of course, he was himself assassinated by Ruby. A couple of questions here. Again, we don't want to give away everything in the book because we want the book's coming out in a couple of weeks. We want everyone to read the book or buy the book. But was, in your view, Oswald the sole assassin? And secondly, I mean, who hired Ruby? Were the people who, if it was indeed a big conspiracy, if the mob was behind it, was it the same people paying Oswald who were paying Ruby? Were they in the same camps?
Yeah, I never was able to put a gun in Oswald's hand that day, either when he shot supposedly Tippit or when he shot the president. And the chief of the Dallas Police Department at the time, Jesse Curry, he wasn't able to put a gun in his hand either. And he actually said that throughout his life. They even did a gun residue test on Oswald after they arrested him, a paraffin test. And at best, they admitted that it was inconclusive.
So you don't think Oswald killed Kennedy?
I don't think he did. No, I think he was involved with the people who did. I think that he was probably the person who FBI records say was named Lee, who tipped them off to the Chicago plot and then later on the Miami plot. But I do not think, I have it in the book, I say that he figured they weren't going to try anything in Dallas. And because they had already been almost caught twice, so they were going to wait until 64 if they did anything at all. So no, I don't think he was involved in it, because if he had been, I think he would have done a better job.
You don't think Oswald was involved in it?
I don't think he pulled the trigger, no.
What was he doing there? Who was paying him?
He worked there, and he got a job there by the people who were his family was staying with, the Paynes. And the Paynes have since been shown to have deep intelligence ties to organizations like USAID and other CIA-backed organizations. So that's stuff that did not necessarily come out back when they filmed, for example, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, but it has come out in the last 10 to 15 years.
And then what about Ruby then? Who was he working for?
Well, under my theory, Ruby was tied in with the Carlos Marcello crowd, and he was definitely a part of Marcello's operation. So under my thesis, it's the same people who owned the camps that trained the Cubans. Those camps were, the land they were on were owned by mafia types like Carlos Marcello. So I think Ruby was in that world. He was suspected of running guns to Cuba during the revolution. And there's no reason why the Bay of Pigs invasion trainees from America had to get their guns someplace. It didn't come from the CIA. It came from the mafia. And that is where I think Ruby got his orders from, to silence Oswald so he wouldn't talk about all of the different things he knew.
One of the things about John F. Kennedy was his presidency was pretty glamorous. I mean, now we can look back and we can see a lot of that glamour was manufactured, but Camelot really existed. In your narrative, Terrence, it's a rather, it sounds like a rather shabby thing. People, criminals, psychopaths, losers like Oswald and Ruby being paid by the mob to kill this man. Was it an appropriate end to Camelot? Did JFK, was there something sort of incongruous between the assassination and the JFK presidency?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, it was definitely a candidacy and a presidency that was made for the television generation. It was a very media-forward administration, and they understood what Kennedy's power was when he was in front of a camera and in front of an audience, too. He had a natural charisma. He had a vision of what he wanted for the country. And it was also a very deliberate administration. If you'll notice, they didn't, and if you look back at it, you'll see that they weren't hair trigger people. They put a lot of thought into what they wanted to do.
To use a term, hair trigger.
Right, isn't it? Yeah, especially given the subject we're talking about. But they were a very deliberate administration, and they took their time, and when they moved with purpose, and they were effective. But his administration also was fraught with a lot of controversy and a lot of upheaval in 3.5 years. You had, in the beginning, you had the Bay of Pigs invasion, which failed and embarrassed the country. That wasn't his fault. That a lot of that was Eisenhower, because the planning happened under Eisenhower. Then you had the Cuban Missile Crisis that happened afterwards, where a lot of people in the country thought he was weak on communism, and he blinked. I don't think he did, but we did move our missiles out of Turkey. So take that as you will. A lot of people didn't know that at the time. We do now. There were also a lot of unrest on college campuses because of integration, and they were pulling down the segregational practices of the South. So that was part of the reason why he was assassinated also. A lot of the people who were fearful of the communists were also fearful of segregationists and the anti-segregationists, those who wanted integration. They thought it would bring about the ruin of the country. They were wrong, of course, but that was their motivation, in my opinion.
This research, it sounds to me like, and you're not unusual here, as a degree of obsession that you have for this event, this defining event of the last part of the second half of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. How does it alter how you think of yourself as an American? How should we be thinking of ourselves as Americans this 4th of July? I don't want to so much talk about Trump and contemporary America. That's another story and maybe another show or another series of books. But
sure.
What is this dark and very dirty event tell us about America? Or is it just a haphazard event that could have happened anywhere?
I think it was a perfect confluence of events and people who had the motivation and means to enforce their will. I don't think it was a lot of people. I think it was maybe 10 or 20 at the most who knew all the details, and much fewer than that who knew exactly what was going to happen and when. I think that America isn't any different than any other superpower that we've seen throughout history, going back to Egypt and all the way up to now. I think the European and Eastern superpowers certainly had their conflicts, and they had their dark histories, dark elements of when they fell short. But I think those who are in power, whether it's Americans or the British or the Russians in their part of the world, they do anything they can to hold on to it, because they obviously feel that their worldview is the right one. And there's got to be something to it because they're in charge at the time. But for me, I don't think that is a uniquely American ideal. I think what makes America unique is that we think we can do it better than anybody else has, that we're going to be different. And I think history has proven that when we do try regime change, it doesn't always work out well for us. We're pretty good at liberating people, but then when it comes to actually running something, it's better to turn over the keys to somebody else, usually somebody local. We haven't done that very often.
There are many conspiracy theories about this. Perhaps the best known is the Oliver Stone movie, JFK. One of the things that often occurs to me, Terrence, is that, and we've done some shows on the mafia, the American mafia, is if indeed there were 10, as you suggest, 10 or 20 people involved in this scheme, wouldn't eventually it have come out on their deathbed? Wouldn't one of these, and I'm guessing they were all men, wouldn't one of these men have boasted about what they achieved?
A few of them did, and a few of them were ready to come forward and go on the record and say that, and they ultimately wound up dying pretty quickly. They didn't die of old age. There was one person I suggest everybody take a look at, and he certainly, the research into him made me think that there was a novel here. A gentleman by the name of George de Mohrenschildt. He was born in Russia. He worked both sides during World War II, and then he was involved in intelligence when he relocated here to the United States. And he worked for the oil industry as a geologist, but then he happened to go to a bunch of different places where revolutions would happen. And I think he was involved in the planning for the second Bay of Pigs invasion. That didn't happen. And you take a look at him and you see the scope of the people who were involved in this, in my view. You can't look at him. He was also the person who wound up introducing Oswald to the white Russian community in Dallas. Now, this was a very important individual, very cultured, worldly. And why would he latch on to, of all people, the guy who ultimately wound up killing the president of the United States?
What qualities, Terrence, does a novelist bring to this? Bob Dylan's Murder Most Foul song from 2020 is, in my view at least, a masterpiece. He wrote, "The day they blew out the brains of the king, thousands were watching, no one saw a thing. It happened so quickly, so quick by surprise, right there in front of everyone's eyes. Greatest magic trick ever under the sun, perfectly executed, skillfully done." That sort of poetic interpretation is, of course, memorable. Right. Novelists in the business, though, not so much of poetry, but of prose. What is the challenge and the opportunity for a prose writer about this kind of momentous historical event?
I think the challenge is to avoid romanticizing it and to avoid looking at it from a 21st century lens. For me, I had to keep reminding myself that when the people that day were watching all of the news accounts and they were listening to the radio and hearing people throughout the country talking about how sad they were about this, they did not have the benefit of the Zapruder film. There was no footage on the news of the shooting itself.
And this was the home movie by Zapruder that...
Right. And as a matter of fact, Time Life and the Luces, who were friends of the Kennedys, purchased the rights to Zapruder's footage and didn't show it for years. They would allow still footage to be shown in their magazine, but they wouldn't allow anyone to see it. It wasn't until it appeared on the Geraldo Rivera show, I think in 1973, that Americans got their first look at it. And I think after that, the American and people throughout the world, people saw that it wasn't as it was described, that the shooting was fairly obvious that he was hit, went back and to the left, a phrase that was made famous by the JFK movie. So a lot of the people that recounted what they saw, especially even professional news people like Dan Rather, he famously got it wrong when he was on the air in the days right after the assassination, after viewing the Zapruder film. They realized that they weren't being told the whole story. And I think that gave rise to a whole new generation of people who were very interested in this.
Of course, we live in intensely conspiratorial times. Trump is himself both a cause and a product of our age. He recently released a lot of the archives. Were you one of the first people to look at those? Did it reveal anything different?
It did. It revealed an awful lot of what I had already included in the book. And that was that I don't think there was a hard conspiracy, as I said earlier. I think it was more of a loose conspiracy of CIA and intelligence community affiliated people who did this. And the cover-up happened because these organizations looked into it. They realized, well, so-and-so could have pulled this off, and we worked with them for 10 years. Let's back away from that. There was also a lot of telling testimony and transcripts from the Warren Commission itself. When the Warren Commission realized that people from the CIA were lying to them under oath, they actually asked Dulles, who used to be in the CIA, run the CIA. Now he was in charge. He was part of the Warren Commission. They asked him, "Can't you compel these people to tell us the truth?" And he said no. And they said, "Well, we know they're lying." And he said, "Well, prove it." And he says, they won't tell you the truth. Their bosses won't tell you the truth. And that's because what we do is a very specialized skill. And as Americans, we're really worried about that. We don't like unelected officials guiding where this country is going to go, because that also doesn't work out too well for us in our history either.
The JFK assassination triggered a number of other assassinations of very high-profile people, high-profile American politicians, public figures, MLK and Bobby Kennedy in particular. In your view, is there any connection between what happened in Dallas in '63 and what happened in Memphis in '68, or in Los Angeles in June '68?
For me, it's awfully inviting to say that there is. I I don't think the same people were behind all of them, though I wouldn't be surprised if some elements that were involved in the Kennedy assassination decided to get the band back together and see what they could do. I haven't really studied the MLK assassination yet as deeply as I have the JFK assassination. That's probably going to be one of my future projects that I want to spin off from this trilogy. But I don't, for me, I just don't know enough to absolutely say yes, there were. I do think it's distinctly possible, though.
Terrence, excuse me. Late last year, I went to Dealey Plaza in Dallas. It has a museum-like quality. It seems almost frozen in the past, back to November 1963.
Mm-hmm.
How did this event, in your view, change America? I don't think an American president had been assassinated, certainly in the 20th century. What did this mean, in your view, as we approach our July 4th celebration of Independence Day in 2025?
Mm-hmm.
Now over 60 years ago. How did this change America?
Well, from what I've been able to see and from the conversations I've had with people in my family who were alive back then, it was certainly the end of American innocence, where we thought we were always the good guys, where we were the liberators, and where we were the one hope of the world against the ongoing threat of communism and totalitarianism. It proved that the post-World War II boom and innocence was dead. And I think that was a reflection of the country's decision after Eisenhower and the successful administration he had to go against Nixon, who was his vice president, and elect Kennedy by a narrow margin, but enough people voted for him. There's also conspiracy theories about the 1960 election, too, that we're not going to get into here. But I definitely think that his death woke everyone up to realize that we weren't untouchable, that there were forces in this country that were destructive, and that if we don't pay attention to them, they can be dangerous.
What does it mean to be woken up from a dream?
It depends on how you're woken up. If you're woken up at the start, you might flail around. And if you're woken up gently, sometimes it's like a frog in boiling water. You don't jump because you don't realize it's happening. I think that also is the reason why a lot of our subsequent administrations have slow walked bad news. And they figured, well, if we just give it enough time, people forget about it, or it'll take the sting out of it if it comes out 3 years later. I think that's the reason why Watergate blew up into what it was. And it wasn't necessarily the break-in itself. It was the cover-up where a lot of the crimes took place. So
is the death, you talk about the death of innocence in America. Is that for you then the death of the American dream, whatever that means?
I think it was certainly a reinvention of the American dream. I think that we're fortunate enough to have that American dream take on a new entity and a new vision with every new group of people that fight so hard to come here. And I think that was certainly true back then, of different cultures and people from all around the world coming here, becoming American citizens, working for the American dream, and bringing a piece of where they came from with them while contributing to the overall greater good. I don't think we've seen that as much in recent years. I think there's been a lot more of, instead of a melting pot, it's more like fondue, where we all enjoy the same technological advances, but we hold back a little bit of our own cultures, unfortunately, from each other. And I don't think that's necessarily healthy. But I think back then, the American dream certainly got renewed, and it was it was the death of one part of it, but I don't think it died entirely at all.
Well, finally, isn't that the ultimate irony, is that the American dream is about agency? What you write about in your book and so many other books about what happened in Dallas reflects a degree of agency. How did it happen? Who was determining it? Who held the gun? Who shot the gun? Who was paying the shooters? Who the shooters were? Who they weren't? So in an odd kind of way, in a chilling, dark way, the JFK murder was a manifestation of supreme agency.
It certainly was, yes. And you know, Americans up until that time, and certainly film fans can attest to this, the appeal of film noir throughout the 50s and 40s and somewhat into the 60s was different. I mean, it definitely allowed a lens into the darker elements of the human condition, but we were able to see it on the screen. We were able to see it at a distance. And with this assassination, it was brought directly into our homes for the first time through television reports, through radio reports, and now it's lived on in terms of documentaries and books and countless articles that have been written about it. So it was definitely, I think it was a wake-up call for the country to realize that none of us are untouchable and that we probably never were. And that was certainly something that was punctuated by the resulting horrors that happened in Vietnam soon after.
Wise words from Terrence McCauley, the author of an upcoming novel, The Twilight Town, a Dallas 63 novel, of course, about JFK's assassination. What are you going to be doing in a couple of days, Terrence? I hope you're going to manifest agency and not just going to wander around, are you?
No, I'm going to manifest the hell out of some hot dogs and hamburgers and maybe catch some fireworks as well. It's, you know, we're not a perfect country, but I love it, and I think that at its best, it can stand for the best in humanity, and I think that's always something worth celebrating. Not necessarily where we are right now, but where we can hopefully be if we work together.
Happy Independence Day, Terrence. Best of luck with the new book. Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Talk to you soon.